So I'm going to allow Brother Will to tell you a little bit more about him, but I'm going to tell you about him from my perspective. Brother Will's mom is actually a colleague of mine at Regis University, and so he has done us the honor several times of coming out and speaking on issues of racial justice, and I have actually had the pleasure of hearing at least one of the stories that I know he's going to share today, and found just his experiences and his ability to articulate experience and talk about how we can move towards greater justice, both within our own internal process and within the world. I found it incredibly motivating, and continue to think of him every single time somebody asks me about a speaker related to this. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to tell you just a little bit more about himself and his experiences, both within religious communities and outside, and how that ties into our topic today of talking about policing in communities of color. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Brother Will, and I'm so glad that you could be here with us.
Thank you all so much. Oh, it's nice to see all these beautiful smiling faces. One of the things I like to do is just to take the time to take people in. So if you ever see me and I'm silent, it's not because I'm at a loss for words in the sense of like searching for something, but more just taking you in and seeing you. I feel like in our context, one of the things that we're missing so much in our world is just seeing each other, taking the moment to look into each other's eyes. We're so fast paced, we're moving all of the time. So sometimes it just matters to see you. So my name is William Dickerson II. I am the executive director of an organization called Brockton Interfaith Community. It is a faith-based community organizing collaborative in Brockton, Massachusetts, which is about 40 minutes south of Boston, just to give a location for where I'm coming from. I am a Colorado native, so I was born and raised and cultivated and grown in the Colorado area, in like the Denver, Aurora, Colorado area. And like Bobby said just a minute ago, I also attended Regis University, where I got my undergraduate degree in sociology. And today I really want to, just take some time to share some story and share a little bit of my, how I got to where I am and got to the work that I'm doing, in hopes to illuminate a little bit for folks what I see some of the struggles are in context to policing and race. But before I do that, I'm a singer. And so if you've seen me do anything before, which some of you might have, I sing before I do anything. If you haven't, now you know that you are always gonna at least hear me sing before we get out of space together. And so I'll sing a song and I'll kind of explain after why I choose to sing the song that I do, and then I'll get right into the discussion itself. How does that feel for folks? Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Wow.
So part of why I sing the song that I do in this particular moment, and whenever I open up to speak, why I sing is first and foremost, it's about grounding. It's about grounding myself and reminding myself that I'm safe. That's the first thing. The second thing is about grounding the people that I care about, that I'm in relationship with in the moment, grounding us all together in something common. And so the song that I chose, this freedom song, is a song that I've been singing quite a bit lately. A song that I bring up because it like actually calls my ancestors to the forefront of conversation. So it's a Negro spiritual, and it comes from a time when my ancestors particularly were in the fight and the struggle for freedom. And that there was a way and there was a tenacity that started to come over the enslaved people of this country, that they started to realize that the freedom that they were going to have was actually going to come at a cost, at a great cost to them, but that freedom was so deeply important that they were willing to trade their lives to have it. And the reason that I bring that in the forefront of this conversation is, like, so oftentimes we have to ground ourselves in the reality of the context of our country. So for many of us, right, myself included, as a Black person in the United States right now, I'm constantly reminded that our country was built in such a way that it was on the backs of stolen people, right? That we stand, and we constantly and should constantly remember that we stand on stolen land, and that the world as it operates right now is a world that is operating on the ideology in some form of fashion of like stolen wages, people stealing people's resources from them. And so if we can ground ourselves in this, then we can start to think about, if that's not the thing that we want to portray or the thing that we want to have, then it is important for us to then try to figure out, what does liberation look like for ourselves, for the people around us, for our communities, and quite frankly, for our country. And so laying this out in that context, like, helps me to then go into this conversation, one of the many conversations about race and its relationship to the structures that exist in our context. So when I was about, I want to say 11 or 12 years old, I was riding with my mom. My mom owned a red Toyota Corolla. So I'm sitting in the front seat with my mom, and my younger sister, who's 20 months younger than me, is sitting in the back seat. And we were driving up to the mountains. And the reason we were on our way up to the mountains is I have an adoptive grandmother who was like doing what she does. She wanted to figure out ways to give us, resources, money to do things. And so she had her own personal business, and she wanted us to come and help her like tear up some boxes, things like that. And then she would give us money and teach us like some of the values of like how to, of working, and like how to get money, what to do with that money once you get it, and like just teaching us different kinds of values and things like that. And so we were on our way up there. We're driving, and we're on the highway, so we're moving. And a police officer pulls up behind us and turns on the lights. And so this is my first encounter with the police. And so, I'm almost like borderline excited because, in school I had heard that like police officers were, like these cool people. They went and they helped folks, and they went around in community and just supported people. So I'm borderline excited about this, but I'm also borderline nervous because I'd also heard, from my own parents and being in relationship to them, that I also had to be careful with police officers, that they sometimes aren't always there to help me. And so I was constantly like wrestling with like, what was that about? And like, why was that happening in my 12-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old mind you. Okay. And so the police are pulling up behind us, and they're pulling us over, and my mom pulls over. And, so I'm like, I wasn't feeling anything until I looked over and I realized that my mom was visibly afraid. And this was like really important to me because I'd never seen my mom visibly afraid before. And so when I was looking over at her and she was visibly afraid, I then started to get afraid because I was like, oh, something must be up. And I'm like very empathic. And so I like really could feel the energy coming off of her. And so she's like sitting there, and now I'm like really quiet, and I'm like kind of just looking forward. And I notice that she's moving very slowly throughout the car, trying to get things ready before the police officer gets up there. And I don't know why these things are happening. I know why they're happening now, but I don't know why they're happening then. The police officer walks up and says, I want your license and registration. She grabs those things and she's handing it to the police officer. And she's like, not quite sure why you're pulling me over. And the police officer is like, you were speeding. I got you clocked at going 55 miles an hour and, 85 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone. And of course my mom is like shocked. And so the police officer walks back, and, my mom's like just thinking to herself, how is that possible? And so the police officer does the thing that he does. He takes like 15 minutes. He comes back. And my mom immediately was like, obviously I might have been speeding, but there's no way I could have been going that fast. And the side note to this is because we were in a Toyota Corolla, and, at that particular time period, even now, if you're driving a Toyota Corolla at 85 miles an hour, you're going that fast because the steering wheel actually literally shakes when you're driving. So it's like a built-in slow down on the car. And she's like, I know I couldn't have been going that fast. And the police officer is like, no, you were going that fast, and like raises his voice and starts yelling at her, and then tells her, and for arguing with me, for talking back, I'm going to write you up for road rage too. And takes the ticket and her information and throws it into the car, and throws it so hard that it actually hits me in the front seat. And my heart is like racing at this moment in time. And I'm racing because I'm very angry that this is happening to my mother, who I really care about and I love. And I'm also like powerless to do anything about it. And then to make matters worse, he looks into the car and he sees me in the front, and he's like, and just so you know, looking at my mom, he says, we're out, like also looking for all of the little drug dealers running around here. So you should be careful. And laughs and walks back to the car, gets in the car, and speeds off. That is the first encounter that I had with police. The very first encounter I had with police. Now, some of the things that I want to like bring out of this story that I think are deeply important is, first and foremost, the police officer was not white. the police officer was actually a Mexican man. This is the first thing I want to pull out. And the reason that I want to pull this out as like a moment to like teaching is when we talk about policing and we talk about racism in relationship to policing, oftentimes we think about these things as like white and black or white and brown or whatever it is, that like the perpetrator of race of white supremacy and racism in that context has to be a white person in order for it to be carried out that way. And so oftentimes the argument gets lifted up. You can't have racism in the police department if a black cop is shooting a black person. And that's because we don't completely understand how race works. See, race is about white supremacy in our context. And what I mean by that is the construct of race was created to create a hierarchy of race in our context. And that the hierarchy was set up to say that that white people were supposed to be the best or the most superior in the context, and that people then got less or got more inferior as you went down the list, as you got darker in hue. And so when we talk about racism in our context, we're actually talking about people aspiring to whiteness, and that the power of racism sits in the superiority of whiteness. And so, if everything is predicated around this, then the story around what a black person must be worth in society is something that all of us are taught. White, black, brown, right? Asian, Native American, all of these different groups of people are taught something about the color of a person's skin. And as we get into a more globalized world, right, we see that that gets even taken into other countries. And so the reason I want to bring this out is because if you want to undo racism inside of like something like a structure like the police, you don't do that by giving police officers more training. You don't do that by like just getting rid of the outright racist police officers, and you don't do that by hiring more police officers of color. That all of those things don't address the issue until you go towards the structure itself and how ideologies like influence that. Here's what I mean by that. If all of us are taught that, like, from the time that we're born, like through media, through education, through all of these different sources, if we're all taught that there's a hierarchy in terms of race, and that we're also taught that black people are more likely to be criminals in our context, then any police officer that pulls me over, whether white, black, brown, whatever, when they see me, what the statement that the police officer was making is a 12-year-old black kid, I see you as a drug dealer. That's what you're worth to me in this particular moment. And that's an ideology that actually is, or a prejudice that actually has been created and perpetrated in the police department for the purposes of being able to spot dangerous people up front. And so if you apply that to race and color, then that's the way that it's going to get carried out in our space. So I'm sharing some of these things because then the impact of that is when I have an encounter with police, even at 12 years old, that encounter has a level of like violence that could occur. So if this police officer believes that I'm a drug dealer, this police officer also could believe that I have a gun in the car. If this police officer believes that I have a gun in the car at 12 years old, then me like jumping around and being excited about the police officer could provoke the police officer to pull that gun on me. And if I move too quickly and the police officer feels too afraid of what's happening, right, I could be shot just like that. So the structures that like have been created and that exist in our context when it comes to policing have too many dangerous factors and that there has to be another way that we think about community safety if we're going to continue to keep everyone safe, including me and my own family members. So I wanted to share another story with you to like actually really like ground this, and then I actually want to open this up for question and asking, because I think that that's where the beauty of like growing and learning from one another really comes from. So when I first got to Massachusetts, so I moved to Massachusetts about 3.5 years ago to accept this position as an executive director. And I really came out there because I felt like it was an opportunity for me to grow. I wanted to learn some things about myself. It was a good opportunity for me and, my wife to venture out and like do something on our own. We were, living in the city with all my family and not her family. And it was just a perfect opportunity for us to get closer to each other. And so we ventured out and we came and we moved to Taunton, Massachusetts, which is like 15 minutes from Brockton, where I work. And, we decided one morning, we had bought a house in the area, and we decided that we wanted to go out and we wanted to see like the neighborhood. And so we were like, all right, let's go exploring. Let's just get lost, because that's what you do when you come to a new place. You get lost, and then somehow getting lost, you find yourself, right? And we're driving around, and as we get into one of the neighborhoods, I notice that a cop is following me. And what ends up happening is I'm driving towards him, he's driving towards me, and he passes me. And I'm looking at him, he looks at me, and I keep driving. I look in the rearview mirror, and he flips around. And I'm like, Sakaria's talking, she doesn't even notice this. I'm like, this police officer is gonna pull me over. And she's like, what police officer? And before she can get that all the way out, he turns on his lights. I pull over, and he gets out of the car. And this time he's walking around to the side of Sakaria, my wife. And what I need to say about this is that at this particular time, Sakaria is four months pregnant. He walks around the side of the car, and he has his hand on his gun. And he looks into the car, and he's like, what are you all doing? What are you up to? And I'm thinking to myself, what are you pulling us over for? I know we haven't done anything wrong, but I feel powerless in the moment to do anything but just answer the question. We're just driving around, looking at our new neighborhood. We just moved here. And he's like, well, I just want to make sure that you all are, just wanted to pull you over and make sure that you're, up to doing, good in community. He's like, he says, there is, a lot of people that come through this area looking for drugs. And, you have, Colorado plates. And, I just, I wanted to make sure that you guys were, upstanding people, basically. Now I want to add some context to this. We're both dressed. So we were just coming from church. So we're both dressed in our church attire, right? We're having a good day. And this context is like he's coming up to me and he's, basically saying, I pulled you over basically because you all look like you were up to no good. But the only thing that he could see when he drove past us, because our windows were down, was that we were black. That was the only thing that he could clearly see about who we were. I wasn't driving erratically. I wasn't even driving like I was lost. We were just driving around the neighborhood. And so as he's talking to us, he's just like, with all of the different things, it was like the out of state plates. It was the, you have slightly, the black car with like the slightly tinted windows. I just wanted, to make sure you could see why I would pull you over for something like that, right? That was a statement to us. And I'm stuck in this moment because what I want to say is, no, I don't see that. I don't understand why you're pulling me over. But I have a wife that's pregnant at 4 months. And I don't want to make the situation or escalate the situation any more than it already is, because it not only could now put myself in danger, but it could put my wife in danger and my unborn son in danger. So these two stories are like, these are just two stories. I have many, many, many more stories about my encounters with the police that are mostly unjustified. Mostly unjustified. I have more pullovers for times when I wasn't doing anything wrong than I do for times that. And I want to, like, are y'all having a hard time hearing me?
We were, but we're good now.
All right. So all I want to because I want to open this up for questions and really have like discussion now. All I wanted to say is I wanted to share these two stories to really illustrate like what it takes for a person of color, and particularly in my case, a Black person, what it actually takes for us to have an encounter with the police. That like the encounter itself, it doesn't take the same amount of like transgression to have an encounter, and it doesn't take the same amount of like argument for that, or the same amount of argument or the same amount of resistant encounter to escalate that to being something that could potentially hurt me or hurt somebody that's with me in the car. And I wanted to share that in the context so that we could then now start to have a conversation both around, and I want to give permission around having a conversation about story itself. So I know that sometimes when you share like heart stories, it makes it hard to be able to have conversation from a mind, like a headspace. I want to create permission for that, and that I'm prepared. I was prepared for that. I'm prepared for that today. And I just want to just wrestle with each other and love on each other through the process of learning.
Brother William, how would you like us to address questions? Do you want us to put them in the chat and then have you address them from the chat?
Yes, that seems like the best way to do it.
Okay.
Or if there's, if folks have a question now, if you just like raise your hand, I could just call you. I think I see most of the names here.
Great.
And then if you're not on video, you can just throw them in the chat. Jay, I see Jay. I know you're probably not Jay, but what's your question? And you're on mute right now. Your sister, you're still on mute, so I'm not hearing you. Mm-hmm. Now you hit it one more time. It came off and then went back on. Perfect.
The training of officers in terms of racism would be very helpful. We have thought that, and I would like for you to address that.
So if I heard you correctly, you want to talk about like the training and thinking like if training would be helpful for police officers in the context of how they engage with like people. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So I want to speak to that from two different perspectives. So one is, whenever you provide more training for people, that actually does help them in the long run if they're willing to be trained and they're willing to be developed. Right. So there's one part of this that is there are some people that are willing to be trained and willing to be developed and willing to like really be challenged, and that does actually create opportunities to have better relationship to the people that you're encountering in policing. I think that the bigger issue is the ideology that comes from policing. So police officers, like the way policing actually got created was in response to slave catching. So the reason that people were going out and they would like hire these people on as police officers, where they were going out and they were giving them legal sanction to go out and go catch slaves and need be shoot them and kill them if they needed to do so and bring them back. And it was like also connected to like bounty hunting and all that. All that stuff was all kind of just developing in that. The idea of policing isn't necessarily about safety. I just want to be clear about that. That community safety, policing is a form of community safety that is disproportionately placed in communities of color and poor communities. And that it's disproportionately placed in communities of color and poor communities because of an ideology that we believe those folks are more likely to commit crime. Yeah. And that the crimes, and that statistically that's true, but we also have to look at the fact that crime, right, is also related to economics. And so we have this correlation that the crimes that people are committing is what we call poor people crime, right? I'm just putting that in quotes, right? It's the kind of crime that, like, you know, I don't have enough food, so I shoplift food, or we make it criminal. Like, I have a severe amount of trauma on my life, but I don't have access to healthcare, so I actually like buy drugs like heroin and like crack to like self-medicate. You see what I'm saying? And so we criminalize those things, and then we create this argument that these people should be, you know, more criminalized because of the fact that, like, see, they're committing more crimes. So, you know, placing that in that context, when you add training to people, right, you're just training them to be, and I've used the language of Vincent Harding, like, you're training them to be better slave catchers in this particular context, right? Because the structure itself hasn't changed at all. And so, hopefully does that speak to it a little bit? Yeah. And yes. I want people to be clear. I want to be clear about this. I actually do believe in putting more training or more trained people into community safety. I think we should have more trained people in community safety. I just don't necessarily believe it's the police that ought to be that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes they call policemen peace officers.
Right.
That would be a better connotation.
Right, if they're operating from the context of peace.
Yeah, I hear you.
I think I see Sister Linda, and then I see Sister, is it Amy? Pastor? Is it Pastor? Get my life together. Okay.
Amy's fine, but yeah, Linda can go first.
All right,
oh, great. Hi. Thank you so much about reframing that for us. And I would like for you to vision public safety for us. In other words, you said we need to look at it differently, and you were beginning to go there with the last thing. Can you give us a fuller vision of what real public safety looks like?
Sure. And one of the things I like to just start with by saying is that, and we as human beings, like, we actually know what it feels like to feel safe, and we know what actually makes that happen. We've been taught that protecting oneself is what brings about like safety. And so, you know, we're taught that like there are these scary things out there that make us like need to own a gun or need to lock our doors or need to like have police around us. And those are the things that are gonna you know, make us feel safe. But when we operate in our like normal world, the things that make us safe people is like good healthcare, right? So, and what I mean by that is, if my mind and my body is in good health, I'm a safer person to myself and to others, right? And so I just want to go into some of them. So I believe that education is one of the major ways in which you can make communities and societies safer. And that if you provide teachers and like counselors in schools, more like if you provide them in schools themselves, more students will be able to access those things. when you access things like a counselor, for example, counselor is helping you to talk out your trauma that you've acquired over the time of your life. There is more trauma that you have occurred the older that you get. You see what I'm saying? So the sooner that you start to get to talk out those issues, right, the less you have to deal with over time. And so what we know is that a lot of this, like the young people that commit crimes, the vast majority of them are have cognitive issues that are causing them to act out in the ways that they act out. So if you provide more spaces for people to be able to work through those issues, right, you'll make them safer to themselves and to other people. That's one thing. And in the same instance, a lot of the police killings that have happened in Colorado particularly have had to do with older folks with different kinds of cognitive issues, whether it's autism, whether it's folks suffering from schizophrenia. There was another person that was killed literally suffering from dehydration. There are these moments when if we had more trained people around what you do with a person that has schizophrenia, that's having a schizophrenic break, right? That when a person that has a knife that has a schizophrenic break, there are trained professionals that know, I have friends that are trained professionals that know what to do in those particular cases, and they don't carry guns or weapons on them. But actually they know how to protect themselves and protect community and subdue the person and then get the person the help that they need. And so if we were able to put more resources and money into those kinds of systems, right, which is the way that it used to be, mind you, all of those systems were cut after the Carter administration, right? And so, going through the Reagan administration and so on and so forth, all those different programs were cut over time. Those were the programs that were keeping people alive and getting our society healthier and healthier with time. So when I'm talking about community safety, I think that, the thing that people oftentimes bring up is well, what about an active shooter and things like that? And, maybe we need a small, police force that carries around weapons that you call when you have active shooters and things like that. But the vast majority of the time, the things that we're engaging with are things that I think there are people that are much more trained to engage with and that can end in people surviving and living through the process of it all. Did I answer your question, Sister Linda?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, Amy, is it up to you now?
Yeah, actually, I'm building on Linda's question to simply, ask, and you alluded to some of those things. What could a white faith community do to not patronize, to not tokenize, but to really be advocates and partners in this conversation and in this work?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One thing that comes to my mind is believe, particularly I'm going to say Black people, when they tell you there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Believe Black people when they tell you there's a problem. I think one of the first places that folks want to go is we want to we come from our own experience, and so we're I don't know if that's true because it hasn't been true for me. And that oftentimes has just gotten in the way of us doing what needs to be done. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is listening to more Black stories and people of color, stories from people of color in general, in this issue will help us to create safer communities. What I mean by this is one of the stories that I just told you was I found myself in the wrong neighborhood. And I'll put that in quotations, and finding myself in the wrong neighborhood increased my chances of being pulled over by the police. And because of the way that I look, and y'all got to see me in person, it's not like I'm really imposing, but I'm not little either. I got these long locks. I got this big beard. For all intents and purposes, like the story and the vision that, and the how the media portrays scary Black people, like I dress it. I wear all black for purposes of my own, and like like people tell me like that they're afraid for my life because of the ways in which I show up in the world. So when that happens, the increase of violence upon me and the violence upon the people that were in my car goes up. But we can actually create policies and ordinances that protect people of color when they go through neighborhoods that could be perceived as being the wrong neighborhood. Right? And so from the policing standpoint, it's about like thinking about the stories of, all right, there are going to be people of color that are going to be driving around and maybe lost, right? What is the police's role when they see somebody that they think is lost or that they don't recognize the car in the neighborhood that they're in? And how does that role become a role of support and love? Like that the encounter is, hey, I noticed that you have out-of-state plates, and I actually wanted to check on you to make sure that you know where you're going, right? Or one that could be even better is, leave me alone. I'm not doing anything. I don't need help. I'll ask you if I need help. Be available if I need your help, right? So creating policies that protect people from those kinds of encounters, but then also creating ordinances that protect people from the other encounter, which is people trying to be the police. And I think that happens more often than the other. I see your hand, Sister Fran. I'll come right to you. I'm just gonna finish what I was saying, and I see your hand. So, I think that you can create powerful ordinances and policies in community that protect folks of color. And you do that by having these kinds of conversations and deepening your relationship with more folks of color. Like listening to their stories, sharing your own stories. So being careful not to extract story for your benefit, but actually bringing stories together and like creating a community experience. Did that cover it?
Thank you. Yeah, very helpful.
Okay. Sister Fran, I saw your hand was up. Am I getting your name?
You're right. Going back again to the conversation you had a couple of people ago, towards the end, you were saying that if we had more therapists and psychologists and that type of thing with the police force, the popular phrase right now is defunding the police. Mm-hmm. And I am constantly receiving Facebook posts about how important the police are and we can't take away their money and blah, blah. And I can keep responding with, we're talking reallocating funds to get more support besides just the police. Am I on the right track?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that it depends on the circle you're in. So there are people out here who are very adamant about abolishing the police. Like they actually don't want the police to exist and they want to defund the police. And that there is something that's connected to the reallocation. Like reallocating those funds to other places, right? But then there are other folks that are like, we need to like raise taxes to get more funding so that we can create those things without like actually shrinking the police force itself. And so you're finding yourself in a place where like it's just there are different schools of thought around what's necessary in the moment. What I actually try to go away from the conversation around policing first, and like actually talk to people again about this idea of what does community safety look like? What would it look like for us to have a truly safe community, and get people to think about that for a minute, to wrestle with that for a minute. Like, if police officers are supposed to make a safer community, right? How are they doing that in the particular moment, and what is their role in that, right? And what we actually see is like their role was supposed to be to keep the peace. If we're talking about like what the role that's like being like that gets offered up, oftentimes it's supposed to keep the peace, and you know, in all neighborhoods. Like you're supposed to be able to call them when you need peace to be brought, right? And you know, the vast majority of like the things that we end up calling the police for weren't things that they actually signed up for, right? So they didn't sign up to be social workers, but oftentimes they're the ones that get called to like take kids out of the home, all those different kinds of things, right? They weren't called to be mental health specialists, but oftentimes they're called and they pick these people up, they put them in jail where they, you know, oftentimes, you know, don't get the support and the things that they need. So it's like asking people the question. Yeah, what I find is that what they actually want is safety, and that they believe that they're going to get safety from the police. And I just agitate people and I push people around. No, that's just one way to think about what safety could look like. Here are the 1,000 other ways that you could think about safety. And if you could prevent someone from dying and still have safety, would you want that instead? And so like, it's like how you push on people around some of these things. But, you know, saying reallocating funds, I think that's beautiful. I think it's like, you know, like helping to bring people along in the process. And I just find that where people are actually stuck is they're trying to figure out why they're protecting the police. Like, and we all have to ask ourselves the question, the places where we want to do that, why are we doing that? And what do we believe that the police are bringing? And are there other ways that we could bring that same thing and still protect everybody? Did that bring some clarity, answer your question a little bit?
Yes, thank you for that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, Brother Ben, and then I see Dr. Miller.
Okay, my name is Ben, and we live in Arvada.
Yeah.
And the other day I heard one of my neighbors, a younger fellow, well, most folks are younger than me, I guess, these days. But anyway, a younger guy, probably the son of our neighbor, yelling across the street to a mixed race son of the other household. I've not seen him myself, but I understand he's at least part African American. Mm-hmm. And he kept yelling the N word. And I thought, man, you have a real problem. And I did not know what to do. I was fearing enough for myself to go up to this guy and say, hey, don't do that, guy. This isn't a good idea. I didn't know what to do, and I just didn't do anything. And I apologize for that, but I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we're new to the neighborhood too.
So I want to make sure that I hear this correctly. So there was like an altercation that was happening.
Well, it was at a distance. The one kid was in his house. The other kid was in his house or in their yards across the street. So it was across the street altercation, so to speak. Name calling. I didn't hear the other person. I didn't hear the kid across the street responding. And it didn't sound to me like it was escalating. Other than the kid with the anger issue, my next door neighbor. I've heard him with in other situations yelling really nasty stuff to his girlfriend and other people. So I don't feel real safe around this guy.
Mm-hmm. And so what's the question that is like coming up for you in that?
Okay, the bottom line question is there anything else I could have done other than keep my head down and stay inside?
If you didn't like feel like you were in danger in any way, what would you have done?
If I had a relationship with the kid, I think I would have gone out and said, hey, this isn't a good idea, guy. What's going on with you?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have a relationship with him, or with the other guy for that matter. So I'm total stranger to these two people. Well, yeah, I should, my wife is reminding me that I'm a person in a wheelchair. So not that I think that has a whole lot to do with it, but, so I guess it's just sort of like, I wish I knew something else I could have done.
Yeah.
I thought about calling the police, but then I thought, oh man, I'm not sure that's a good idea either.
I'm glad you didn't.
Okay,
So,
that's good.
So, but here's what I'll say is, like, this is why I'm lifting up what I'm lifting up, right? I find myself in a lot of situations like this where, like, the only option that I have is like calling the police, and that always brings another layer of danger to myself and to maybe the person that or people that I might be calling the police for. And what's really interesting is, just language. I'm just thinking about this just now, that we don't say we're calling the police for a person. We say we're calling the police on a person, which is interesting.
Right.
It's like,
yeah, I heard that.
There's like, yeah, I had to stop and like change my language around that. Like, language is important because it talks about ideology. It speaks to what we're thinking about when we do that. So I think that what you're proposing is, we don't have enough resources to like it didn't warrant a police officer coming. It didn't seem like that kind of a danger, but it did warrant somebody coming in and mediating the conversation so that they could get to a place where it doesn't escalate to that. And where are those people? Where are those people? They exist. There are people that have the ability to be able to do that, right? We just don't have a way of being able to call them so that they can create the conditions for everyone to feel safe.
And it may be that me being new to the community means that I need to do some more learning about the community I live in to find out if there are and where they are and what their phone number might be.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. I know, Bobby, I know you had your hand up, but I'm seeing a lot of chat stuff going on, and now I'm like realizing I'm never going to catch up looking at all this chat stuff. Are there questions inside the chat that need to be addressed?
I actually put my question in the chat and thought that, and you may not be able to see the chat, so I was gonna like bring your attention to it. Okay. My question, if it's helpful for people, great. If not, we can move on to somebody else's. But I think one thing that's going on in our community, Will, is do you know about nextdoor.com? Is that, I'm still trying to figure out if that's everywhere.
I don't think I know it, no.
Okay, so it's like this, it's almost like this social media community, except it connects you to people just in your neighborhood, however they draw those lines of neighborhood. And so people get online and they sell things and they buy things, and you can get recommendations for a plumber or whatever. But there's also, it connected with me when you were talking about not just policing, but the way in which the community kind of creates people who believe that they need to be policing themselves, you know what I mean? That they need to engage in those behaviors. And also connected to Ben's comment in your discussion around calling the police on people. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I see come up in this chat is people talking about, somebody suspicious in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. That we need to keep an eye on. There's somebody walking around, they're suspicious. We better worry about this, which I've come to pretty much understand is code for they're brown or black. And so we don't automatically assign them to necessarily being in this neighborhood, and then other people start chiming in. And so the fear for me in those situations is that it can move very quickly to, of course, calling the police or having some sort of confrontation that's not going to be okay for this person who's just in our neighborhood. Is there anything that you've seen in terms of successful intervention online for that type of kind of group mentality and that self-appointed policing, or whatever we want to call it, of neighborhoods? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I'm like, without taking like a structured law approach, like ordinance approach, it's like how do you like organize community to operate from a perspective of assuming the best in people and loving people as they come into your community, like being more hospitable to people as they come into your community, as opposed to the other, which is assuming that they're up to no good. Is that right?
Right, and addressing our own like internalized biases, like you said, like that from the time I was teeny tiny, I've been trained in the society to say, oh my goodness, brown danger, you know, and how to begin to become aware of that and address it so that we all don't continue to be part of the problem too.
Yeah. So, I mean, it takes work. But I think that one of the things that, so I do this thing online called 52-week challenge. And I'm in the process of like really creating a set of trainings that people can go through over 52 weeks of undoing racism in themselves and in their communities. And one of the things that I offered up is that when you're in community, like having your neighbors over to your house and starting to have conversations about race, starting to have conversations about, racism in those contexts, and starting to gather more like-minded people around, answering the question, do we want racism to live in our community, or do we want to eradicate racism from our communities altogether? Getting people to admit, yeah, we want to we want to be anti-racist in our context. And then you go around and you just start to have conversations with people. It's like, it takes work, because what you're actually having to do is you got to build relationship with all your neighbors. And then you also got to be willing to step into confrontation. And I don't mean like fisticuffs, right? I mean, when you hear somebody say something, right, that's racist, you got to be like, no, that's racist. And that's not funny, and it's not okay. And I don't think that it has a place in our community. You have a place in our community, but the racism and the racist ways in which you're showing up in this moment don't. And so what that then says is, are you willing to leave behind your racist behavior and be a part of the community in the most beautiful way that I already know you are? Does that make sense? So it's like the thing you're talking about is about building, the same way we build neighborhood associations, right? You build in anti-racism, you build in anti-oppression, you build in anti-bias kinds of trainings and developments, and you give people the option and the opportunity to come and learn from those. So I know we're running at time. Oh, there's another. So there's resources and things that are getting put in the chat as well. I'm here for it, but I know that we're at time, so I want to make sure that I'm respecting everybody's time in this space. Is there maybe one more question that people have?
We have one, William, from Queenie Winter in the chat. Where do we start conversations about racism when there's a culture of disliking transplants and people who move from outside of Colorado into community? As an outsider, I get that. Never ever experienced that back east. Seems to be a Colorado thing to dislike people from California, Texas, New York, etc.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing in Colorado. So if I'm understanding it, how do we cultivate these kind of conversations when people also have another bias?
Right. That those prejudgments.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I think about,
Well, can I also give some context to that, brother?
Please give me some context. Help me.
Great, because thrilled to have you here. Really great conversation. I'm digging it. Because I'm from New York and I came to Colorado, and you're from Colorado who went back east. So I lived in 10003 West Village, New York City for 7 years. Lived in Staten Island and taught and worked in Brooklyn, Kingsborough College. So feeling like the first ism I experienced out here was someone, actually a Latino woman, telling me that my voice didn't matter in Jeffco because I'm not from Jeffco. And as you can see, and I do identify as a white woman, feeling very safe in my community for a variety of reasons, but also feeling like I'm wondering about more so, how do you have conversations with the police in your community? We're spending a lot of time talking about the police, and I know from my research in Arvada that we have a population that's 91% white. We have a population with degrees that make over $70,000 a year. And we also have an old white population. Sorry, no offense, but that's what the data, and I dropped that all in the chat so people can understand. And I wanted you to make sure you knew, this is what Arvada is today. But, also having conversations with my police force, and they're willing to talk about officer-involved shootings. They're willing to share data. They're willing to have these conversations, and they really want to. So what would it look like for you if I went to the chief of police? Like what should I be asking him to do, or what information should I be asking from him? Because Chief Straight I've been sharing emails with him, and he's like, absolutely. What data do you want? What can I tell you, Katie, or what can I do? How do you bridge that conversation with your local police force?
So it just depends on the police force. So what I find is that police officers and police force are actually, most of the time, are pretty transparent around stuff until you start to meddle with some of their stuff. And so like if you want to the things that I oftentimes want to know is, how is money being spent in the police budget? Mm-hmm. Where is it being spent? And where is it going? So, I come from the perspective of four major things. Like, we want to demilitarize the police. We want to create strong and clear accountability measures for police officers. We want to reallocate funding to places where we can create a stronger community safety space. And we want to reimagine what community safety looks like. And so when I ask questions, like if I'm going towards demilitarization, a big part of that is, are they what is in their policy, what is in their use of force policy around tear gas, around the 1033 program, which is the program that most police forces engage with that allows them to get military grade weapons to be brought into the police force itself. So that's like tanks, Humvees, sound cannons. In Colorado, y'all got all of that stuff right now.
Yeah, but not. I mean, I'm going to push back ever so gently, because your four questions are ladled in the proof that those four things are currently happening. And I got to say, in Arvada, I've never seen a tank. And I appreciate and respect your questions, but I think I would flip them to this group to ask them if they are happening here in our community, right? So we need to know, right? Like, that's what I'm saying to you is, like, my brother works Brooklyn, 27th precinct, so trust me, I know what a militarized police force looks like in New York City. I've seen them actively up close and personal. So I love your perspective. I'm just saying, for this group, I think in Arvada, we should turn those questions in, questioning first if they are happening, if so, why, and how so can we change that practice and policy. Does that sound fair?
Yeah,
Reasonable?
I think so. I think that one of the things that you will find is, so I know a little bit about, because I did a lot of policing work in a lot of these different communities where I was at. So yeah, they don't have tanks, but they are willing to use tear gas. And they may not have one thing, but so demilitarization is about figuring out, asking the question, what is the militarization that is happening in that particular context? And then removing that thing from it. And so I'm in agreement around that, but just being really clear that police forces over time, especially in these cities, have different ways of engaging in each one of these, and that they can be police forces can also be very tricky around how you ask questions and how you get into space with them, that makes it hard to see what's actually being used and what's not being used. And so when you get a police budget, right, you ask for the police budget, that will give you a clear indication around how money is being spent in a particular community. The use of force policy is about like how people use, like how police officers are able and allowed to use force on community. And so that's a place to start to then create like accountability measures around that. When you think about like going towards like some of those kinds of things will like start to at least create the conversation and moving forward. But
yeah, I mean, it's refreshing to live in a community that hasn't been successfully sued in over 10 years. I mean, I've never lived in a community where the city government isn't regularly paying out on some kind of, use of force claims. So I was shocked when I found that out about Arvada, that hasn't happened in over 10 years. So I think you're saying great things, and I love I have a whole bunch of questions in my head to ask the chief and the PIO. So, great to get some more data and information and apply it here in Arvada. Thanks so much for your time today. It's really, really great.
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead, Bob. You're getting ready to say something. Oh yeah. So I mean, I'm really appreciative of being able to spend some time with you all, today, in relationship to this, and, got to share some of my, my story with you in hopes to like really, just ground folks in some of the ways in which policing and the engagement of police officers differs based around like, our money privilege or our color privilege, race privilege, and or oppression in these kinds of spaces. And then I'm hoping that part of this will be that you just continue to keep engaging in your community, getting to know people, getting to like hear people's stories and sharing your own, and that we continue to create our societies in an anti-racist, anti-oppression kind of mentality that is inclusive of all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brother William, thank you so much for your advocacy, for your leadership, for the way you're living out your faith, and for joining us today with your time. You've taught us so much, and as is always the nature of these hard conversations, they spin us into new spaces for more conversations and relationships, and we're so grateful. Thank you so much to Robin Coopernick and the social justice team for hosting our event today. And again, a very special welcome to those who've been a part of our group who aren't a part of our regularly worshiping community at Arvada, but this is who we are. This is the kind of hard work we constantly do as a congregation to ask ourselves how we can be more faithful disciples of Christ in the world. So please join us if you're looking for a community of faith who shares with you. And also just a reminder that if you'd like to support the work of our social justice team and certainly extend gratitude financially to Brother William for his work, you can check the chat for the information about where to send that.